The cold metal of the observation deck pressed against Commander Veltar's face as he watched the dark shapes growing larger in the starfield. His four-fingered hand trembled slightly against the reinforced glass, leaving smudges that caught the dim light from the emergency panels. The hegemony fleet moved like predators through space, their black holes absorbing the distant starlight and giving nothing back. Behind him, the mining station buzzed with desperate activity. The corridors that had once echoed with the sounds of peaceful work now rang with alarm bells and shouted orders. Veltar could hear the heavy footsteps of the Vorthok miners as they abandoned their crystal extraction equipment, their rock-like bodies moving with surprising speed through the narrow passages. The Namari technicians floated past in their environmental suits, their gaseous forms rippling with anxiety as they secured the station's vital systems. "Commander, incoming transmission," called Communications Officer Creona from her station. Her voice carried the musical quality typical of her species, but fear had stripped away its usual melodic charm. She was young for a Zealothi, barely past her first molting, and her pale blue skin showed the stress patterns that marked their kind under pressure. Veltar straightened his uniform and walked to the communications console. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the stern face of a hegemony admiral. The creature's reptilian features were marked by scars and the cold eyes of someone who had destroyed countless worlds. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Attention, mining station. I am Admiral Thane of the Hegemony Third Fleet. You have violated territorial claims by your continued presence in this system. You have exactly 72 hours to evacuate all personnel and equipment. After that time, this station will be destroyed along with anyone foolish enough to remain." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Veltar looked around at his crew. Chief Engineer Morden, an elderly Zealothi whose wisdom had guided the station through many crises, shook his head slowly. The Vorthok Foreman Krex stood like a statue of living stone, his crystal-embedded skin reflecting the bridge lights in angry red patterns. "Sir, what are our options?" asked Creona, her voice barely above a whisper. Veltar moved to the tactical display, studying the readouts with growing despair. The station's defenses consisted of 3 aging plasma cannons and a single shield generator that had been overdue for replacement for the past 2 years. The hegemony fleet showed 15 heavy cruisers, countless fighter squadrons, and what appeared to be a planet-killer dreadnought at the center of their formation. "We can't fight them," Morden said quietly. "Our weapons are mining tools, not military hardware. The shields might hold for a few minutes at best." Veltar nodded grimly. The station housed over 3,000 beings from dozens of different species, all drawn together by the promise of honest work and peaceful coexistence. They had built something beautiful here, a small example of what the galaxy could be when different peoples worked together. Now it would all be destroyed because of political boundaries drawn by warmongers. "Begin emergency evacuation procedures," he ordered. "Send word to every transport ship in the sector. Offer triple pay for emergency pickup. And activate the distress beacon on all frequencies." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. The station's cargo bays filled with families clutching their few possessions, their faces showing the universal expression of refugees throughout history. The Namari formed protective clouds around their younglings, while Vorthok parents carried their crystal children in specially designed containers. The Zealothi families moved with quiet dignity, but Veltar could see the fear in their large, dark eyes. The first transport arrived within 6 hours, a battered cargo hauler that could take maybe 200 passengers. The captain, a gruff Carillion trader, demanded payment in advance and complained about the inconvenience. More ships trickled in over the following day, but they were small vessels, barely adequate for the enormous task ahead. Meanwhile, the distress beacon continued its lonely broadcast. The message was simple and desperate. Mining station under attack. Civilian population require immediate assistance. Any ship, any fleet, please respond. The signal spread outward at light speed, carrying their plea into the vast emptiness of space. But space remained silent. As the deadline approached, Veltar found himself back at the observation deck, watching the hegemony fleet maintain its threatening formation. They had moved closer, close enough that he could make out individual weapon emplacements on their hulls. The sight filled him with cold dread. "Sir, we've evacuated about 60% of the station," reported Creona. "The remaining transports won't arrive for another 18 hours. Veltar checked his chronometer. They had less than 12 hours remaining. He had hoped for more time, perhaps that the hegemony would show some mercy for the civilians, but Admiral Thane's reputation suggested otherwise. The man had built his career on the destruction of peaceful settlements. "Keep trying." "The beacon," he ordered. "Someone has to hear us." But as the hours ticked by, hope faded. The great powers of the galaxy remained silent, either unwilling or unable to challenge the hegemony's claim. The peaceful mining station had become a pawn in a game played by forces beyond their control. With 2 hours remaining, the bombardment began. The first energy beam lanced out from the lead cruiser, striking the station's outer ring. The impact shook the entire structure, throwing everyone to the deck. Emergency lights flickered on as main power fluctuated. Through the observation window, Veltar could see atmosphere venting from the breach, forming a brief, glittering cloud. "Before dispersing into space, shields up," he commanded, but the ancient generators struggled against the sustained assault. More beams struck the station, each impact sending shockwaves through the metal framework. The sound was terrible, a grinding, shrieking noise that seemed to come from the station's very bones. The remaining civilians huddled in the reinforced sections, waiting for transport ships that might never come. Children of various species clung to their parents while adults tried to maintain calm in the face of approaching death. The station's medical bay filled with injured beings, and the smell of fear filled the recycled air. As another massive explosion rocked the station, Altara realized the truth that had been hiding in his heart all along. They were truly alone. No help was coming. The great darkness of space would swallow them all, and the galaxy would barely notice their passing. The bombardment continued with methodical precision, its blast bringing them closer to the end. The emergency shelters deep within the station's core had never been designed for long-term habitation. Originally built as temporary refuges during mining accidents, they now housed hundreds of frightened beings from across the galaxy. The air. Recyclers worked overtime, creating a constant hum that mixed with the distant sounds of destruction above. Every few minutes, another explosion would shake the walls, sending dust cascading from the ceiling and reminding everyone that death was slowly working its way toward them. Engineer Kethra sat in the corner of Shelter 7, her crystalline body dim with exhaustion. The Vorthok had always been known for their ability to store energy in their crystal-embedded skin, but the constant stress was draining her reserves faster than she could replenish them. Round her, families from different species tried to comfort their young ones, speaking in dozens of languages that the universal translators struggled to process. Simultaneously, the latest bombing run had been particularly severe. Through the shelter's thick walls, they could hear the groaning of metal as the station's superstructure bent under the assault. Commander Veltar had passed through an hour ago, his face grim as he checked on the survivors. The evacuation was proceeding too slowly, and everyone knew it. "Tell us another story, Kethra," pleaded a small Zealothi child, her large eyes reflecting the shelter's emergency lighting. "Something happy." Kethra looked around at the faces surrounding her. Were Nimari technicians floating in their portable atmosphere containers, their gaseous forms swirling with anxiety? A group of Corellian traders huddled together, their fur matted with sweat and fear. Even some of the normally stoic Vorthok miners had gathered close, their rocky features showing unusual emotion. "I remember stories my grandmother told me," Kethra began, her voice taking on the rhythmic quality that her people used for storytelling. Tales of the humans from the old days before the great tragedy that scattered them across the stars. An elderly Namori named Vorgas floated closer, his form rippling with skepticism. "Humans are myths now, child. Their homeworld was destroyed decades ago. Even if some survived, they were just another species, nothing special about them."
Right.
Kethra shook her head, her crystal skin flickering with remembered light. My grandmother served on a trade vessel that worked with human merchants. She said they were different from other species, not stronger or smarter necessarily, but they had something inside them that made them fight when others would surrender. She paused as another explosion shook the shelter, then continued. She told me about a human captain named Park who refused to abandon a disabled ship even when pirates were closing in. He could have saved himself and his cargo, but there were families on that ship, so he stayed and fought until help arrived. One story proves nothing, Vorgus muttered, but his dismissive tone had softened slightly. There are more stories, Kethra insisted. Humans who walked into burning buildings to save strangers? Humans who gave their last food to hungry children from other worlds? Humans who died defending planets they had never seen before? Her voice grew stronger as she spoke. They had a saying, "No one fights alone." It meant that if you called for help, somewhere a human would answer. A young Carillion engineer named Bextel leaned forward. Their planet was destroyed, and the whole human fleet vanished, trying to evacuate their people. How could any have survived? Kethra pressed her hand against the cold metal wall as if trying to feel something beyond it. Maybe they did not all die. Maybe some are still out there listening. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Chief Medical Officer Talwyn, a zealothy who had been working without rest to treat the wounded. Her normally pristine medical uniform was stained with the various fluids that different species called blood, and her face showed the strain of watching too many beings die. "The northern section is gone," she announced quietly. Punched through the outer hull, we lost 12 more civilians in the collapse. The shelter fell silent, except for the sound of quiet weeping. Everyone knew that the attacks were getting closer to the core sections. The hegemony was not just destroying the station randomly, they were working methodically section by section, ensuring that no one would escape. "How much longer?" asked Bextel. Talwyn checked her chronometer. "Transport ships are still 12 hours away. The hegemony will reach the core sections in 6 hours, maybe less." The mathematical certainty of death settled over the shelter like a heavy blanket. Parents held their children closer. The elderly closed their eyes and tried to find peace. But Kethra continued to press her face against the wall, listening to something only she could hear. "What are you doing?" asked the small zealothy child. "Listening for the stars," Kethra whispered. "My grandmother said that space is not empty. It carries voices across impossible distances. If the humans are still out there, maybe they can hear us." Far beyond the system's edge, in the cold darkness between stars, her faith was not misplaced. The human dreadnought, used defiant, drifted silently through space. Its hull scarred by countless battles and patched with materials salvaged from a dozen different worlds. The ship looked like it had been built by someone who cared more about function than beauty. Its angular design speaking of desperate repairs and constant warfare. Captain Jin-Ho Kim stood alone on the bridge, studying the holographic display. That showed the distress signal from the mining station. His face was weathered by years of fighting, marked by radiation burns and the deep lines that came from making impossible decisions. Around him, his crew worked at their stations with the quiet efficiency of people who had learned to trust each other completely. "Sir, the signal is definitely civilian," reported his communications officer, a young woman named Subin who had been barely out of training when their homeworld died. "Mixed species, mostly non-combatants. They are requesting immediate assistance." Nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the display. The hegemony fleet was massive, far larger than anything his single ship could hope to defeat. His crew numbered fewer than 200, the last survivors of humanity's great exodus. They had been fighting a guerrilla war against the hegemony. For years, striking at supply lines and military targets before disappearing back into the void. "Distance to target?" he asked. 18 hours at maximum burn," replied his navigator, an older man named Dongwu, whose steady hands had guided them through countless battles. Kim looked around at his crew. They were tired, all of them. Their ship was held together by determination and salvaged parts. They had been running for so long that some days he forgot what they were running toward. But now, listening to the desperate voices calling out from the mining station, he remembered. "Set course for the Kepler system," he ordered. "Maximum burn, and wake the rest of the crew. We have work to do, as the Defiant's engines ignited. Pushing the scarred ship toward its final battle, Kim thought about the promise that had defined his species. No one fights alone. It was time to keep that promise one last time. The silence of space shattered like glass as reality itself seemed to tear open. Admiral Thane stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the final preparations for the station's destruction. His reptilian eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he observed the systematic dismantling of the mining facility. The outer sections were already gone, reduced to floating debris that caught the light of the distant star. Soon the core would follow, and with it, the last of the stubborn civilians who had refused his generous offer of evacuation. "Sir, the final bombardment is ready," reported his weapons officer, a scarred veteran who had served in dozens of similar operations. "All ships are in position. The station's core will be eliminated in the next salvo." Thane nodded, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the recycled air of his command center. The hegemony had built its empire on moments like this, demonstrating to the galaxy that resistance was futile. When word spread of what happened here, other mining operations would surrender without a fight. It was efficient, if not particularly honorable. "Begin the final attack," he commanded. But before his weapons officer could relay the order, the universe exploded into chaos. A massive tear appeared in space itself, edges crackling with energy that made the bridge's instruments scream warnings. From this wound in reality emerged something that should not have existed, a human warship, its engines howling like a creature in pain. The UES Defiant burst into normal space with a violence that sent shockwaves through the hegemony formation. Its hull was a patchwork of scars and repairs, sections of alien technology grafted onto human engineering in ways that defied conventional wisdom. The ship looked like it had been built by someone who cared nothing for aesthetics and everything for survival. Plasma burns marked its armor, and jury-rigged weapon systems sprouted from its hull like metallic growths. "What in the void is that?" Thane snarled, his reptilian features twisting in confusion and sudden concern. His sensors were having trouble identifying the vessel's configuration. It appeared to be human in origin, but that was impossible. Humans had been extinct for decades. On the bridge of the Defiant, Captain Ginho Kim stood surrounded by his crew. The years of constant warfare had etched deep lines into his face, and radiation burns from their damaged reactor covered his arms. But his eyes burned with a fire that had sustained him through the darkest days of humanity's exodus. Around him, his officers worked with the smooth efficiency of people who had learned to trust each other completely. Engineer Ha-Jin Park hunched over her console, her fingers dancing across controls that managed systems no engineer should have been able to keep running. Half the ship's components had been salvaged from destroyed enemy vessels, reverse-engineered through trial and error. The other half were human systems pushed far beyond their design limits. Somehow she made it all work together. Weapons officer Deng Wuli checked his targeting systems with the calm precision of someone who had spent years turning desperate situations into victories. His weapons were a hybrid collection of human ingenuity and alien technology, each system jury-rigged to deliver maximum damage with minimum resources. Navigator Subin Choi plotted their course through the enemy formation, her young face showing the premature wisdom of someone who had grown up in the shadow of extinction. She had been barely out of training when their homeworld died, but years of running battles had taught her to find paths through impossible situations. "All hands, this is Captain Kim." His voice echoed through the ship's corridors, reaching every corner of the vessel. "We've got friends down there who need help. Let's show these hegemony bastards what happens when they threaten the innocent." The response was immediate and fierce. Throughout the ship, the last humans in known space prepared for battle. In the engine room, technicians coaxed impossible power from their patched reactor. In the weapon bays, gunners loaded ammunition that had been handcrafted from salvaged materials. In the medical bay, doctors prepared for casualties while knowing this might be their final fight. The Defiant struck the hegemony formation like a meteor hitting still water. Kim's ship moved with impossible grace, dancing between the larger vessels, as if gravity itself bent to its will. The human captain had spent years studying enemy tactics, learning their weaknesses through painful experience. Now he turned that knowledge into a weapon. Target their command ship, Kim ordered. Full power to forward batteries. The Defiant's hybrid weapon systems erupted in coordinated fury. Plasma cannons salvaged from destroyed hegemony vessels fired alongside human railguns that had been modified to use alien power sources. The combination was devastating, punching through the enemy flagship's shields and carving deep gouges. In its hull, Admiral Thane staggered as his ship shook under the assault. Damage reports flooded his bridge as systems failed throughout the vessel. Return fire. All ships converge on that vessel. But the human ship was already gone, sliding between his formation like a ghost. The Defiant's engines left trails of exotic particles that interfered with targeting systems, while its hull absorbed and redirected energy in ways that made conventional weapons less effective. On the mining station, survivors pressed against the observation windows of their emergency shelters, watching in stunned amazement as a single ship challenged an entire fleet. Engineer Kethra felt tears streaming down her crystalline cheeks as she recognized the impossible sight before her. "It's true," she whispered. "The humans came. They actually came." The battle became a deadly dance as the Defiant wove through the enemy formation. Captain Kim used every trick he had learned in years of guerrilla warfare, turning the hegemony's own tactics against them. When they tried to surround him, he used their positions to create crossfire situations where enemy ships damaged each other. When they attempted to pin him down, he used the station's debris field as cover, merging from unexpected angles to strike at vulnerable targets. Engineer Park pushed their hybrid systems to the breaking point, routing power through circuits that sparked and smoked under the strain. The ship's reactor core glowed with dangerous intensity, but she held it together through sheer force of will and intimate knowledge of every improvised connection. Weapons. Officer Lee coordinated a symphony of destruction, timing his shots to maximize damage while conserving their limited ammunition. Each hit counted, each miss was a wasted opportunity they could not afford. Navigator Choi plotted courses that seemed to defy physics, using gravitational fields and debris patterns to achieve impossible maneuvers. Her calculations were perfect, threading the needle between enemy ships with precision that left their gunners stunned. The hegemony fleet, designed to crush helpless civilians, found themselves facing an enemy that fought with the desperation of the last survivors of their species. The human ship moved like a living thing, adapting to each new threat with tactical brilliance born from years of impossible odds. As the battle raged, Admiral Thane realized he was facing something more than just a ship. This was the embodiment of humanity's final promise that no one fights alone. The space around the mining station transformed into a graveyard of burning metal and scattered debris. Captain Kim's ship moved through the chaos like a predator that had been wounded but refused to die. The Defiant's hull glowed with heat from dozens of impacts, its patched armor showing fresh scars from enemy weapons. But it continued its deadly dance through the hegemony formation. In the engine room, Engineer Hagen Park worked with desperate efficiency at her jury-rigged control systems. Sparks flew from overloaded circuits as she pushed their hybrid reactor beyond all safety limits. The core temperature readings showed dangerous levels, but she ignored the warnings.
Ice.
Around her, her small team of technicians worked to keep the impossible machinery running, their faces lit by the harsh glow of emergency lighting. Engineering to bridge, she called through the ship's communication system, her voice strained from breathing the superheated air. "I can give you full power for maybe 20 more minutes. After that, we start shutting down whether we want to or not." Captain Kim's voice crackled back through the speakers. 20 minutes is all we need. Keep her running, Park, on the bridge." Kim studied the tactical display with the calm focus of someone who had faced death so many times it had become an old friend. The hegemony fleet still outnumbered them 15-1, but their formation was breaking apart. 3 of their heavy cruisers were dead in space, their hulls split open like broken eggs. 2 more were retreating with severe damage, trailing atmosphere and debris. "Sir, the dreadnought is moving to intercept," reported Navigator Subin Choi, her young face tight with concentration. "They're trying to box us in against the station." Kim smiled grimly. The hegemony commander was learning, adapting his tactics to counter the human ship's mobility. But adaptation took time, and time was something the enemy no longer had in abundance. "Take us straight at them," he ordered. "Full speed, sir." Choi looked uncertain. The enemy dreadnought was 3 times their size, its armor thick enough to shrug off their weapons. "Trust me," Kim said, ramming speed. The Defiant's engines howled as they pushed the scarred ship toward the massive enemy vessel. On the hegemony dreadnought, alarms screamed as sensors detected the human ship's suicidal charge. Weapon systems swiveled to track the approaching target, filling space with deadly energy beams. The human ship shuddered as enemy fire struck its hull, but its reinforced armor held. Kim watched the distance close, his hand hovering over the manual controls. Around him, his crew worked with the silent efficiency of people who had learned to trust their captain's judgment completely. "Now," Kim shouted. Navigator Choi's hands flew over her controls, executing a maneuver that seemed to defy the laws of physics. The Defiant twisted away from the dreadnought at the last possible second, its hull scraping against the enemy ship's shields in a shower of sparks. The sudden turn put enormous stress on the ship's structure. But it held together long enough for Weapons Officer Dongwoo Lee to execute his part of the plan. "Firing," Lee announced. The Defiant's weapon systems erupted in coordinated fury, but not at the dreadnought. Instead, Lee had targeted the enemy ship's external communication array, the delicate equipment that allowed it to coordinate with the rest of the fleet. The concentrated fire turned the array into scrap metal, leaving the massive vessel effectively blind and deaf. "Beautiful work," Kim said, watching as the dreadnought began to drift, its crew struggling to re-establish communications with their scattered forces. But the battle was far from over. The remaining hegemony ships had learned from their losses, adapting their tactics to account for the human ship's unpredictable movements. They began to work in coordinated pairs, trying to trap the Defiant between overlapping fields of fire. Kim studied the tactical display, his mind racing through possibilities. His ship was faster and more maneuverable than the enemy vessels, but it was also heavily damaged. Several of their weapon systems were offline, and their shields were operating at less than 30% efficiency. "Captain," called Chief Communications Officer Minho Nam from his station. "The mining station is trying to help. They're offering to use their equipment as weapons." Kim's eyes lit up with sudden inspiration. The mining station's industrial equipment was designed to crack asteroids and process raw materials. With the right modifications, those same tools could become formidable weapons. "Put me through to the station," he ordered. "Commander Veltar S." The voice came through the speakers, filled with desperate hope. "Captain, we don't have much, but we're willing to try anything." "Can you redirect your mining lasers?" Kim asked. "I'm going to drive some of these ships past your position." "We can try," Veltar replied. "But our targeting systems were never designed for combat." "Leave the targeting to me," Kim said. "Just be ready to fire when I give the signal." The next phase of the battle became a deadly game of positioning. Kim used the Defiant's superior speed to lure enemy ships into the mining station's firing range, then coordinated with the station's crew to unleash devastating attacks on the unsuspecting vessels. The industrial mining lasers, designed to cut through solid rock, proved surprisingly effective against military armor. One hegemony cruiser, pursuing the human ship too closely, found itself caught in a crossfire between the Defiant's weapons and the station's mining equipment. The combined assault overwhelmed its shields and tore through its hull, leaving it a burning wreck. Admiral Thane watched from his flagship as his carefully organized fleet continued to disintegrate. The human ship seemed to be everywhere at once, striking from unexpected angles and disappearing before his forces could respond effectively. His tactical officers struggled to predict the enemy's movements, but the human captain's tactics defied conventional military doctrine. "Sir, we've lost another cruiser," reported his weapons officer. "The human ship is using the debris field as cover." Thane studied the tactical display with growing frustration. The human captain was using every piece of floating metal as a potential weapon or shield, turning the battle zone itself into an extension of his ship's capabilities. Chunks of destroyed vessels became missiles, launched at pursuing ships with deadly accuracy. All ships pulled back to defensive formation, Thane ordered. We'll use our numbers to overwhelm them. But Captain Kim had anticipated this move. As the hegemony ships began to cluster together, he executed his most desperate gambit yet. The Defiant accelerated toward the tightest group of enemy vessels, its damaged hull glowing with heat from overloaded systems. "Sir, we're taking heavy fire," reported Lee. "Shields are down to 10%. "Hold course," Kim commanded. "Park, I need everything you've got." In the engine room, Engineer Park felt the ship shudder around her as enemy weapons found there. "Mark," warning lights flashed red throughout the engineering section, but she kept her hands steady on the controls. The reactor core blazed with dangerous intensity, pushed beyond all safe parameters. "You've got it, Captain," she said into her communicator. "But this is the last run. After this, we're done." The Defiant plunged into the heart of the enemy formation, its weapons blazing. At point-blank range, the human ship's hybrid systems proved devastatingly effective. 2 enemy cruisers exploded in brilliant fireballs, their hulls unable to withstand the concentrated assault as the human ship emerged from the other side of the formation. Like trailing smoke and debris, Admiral Thane realized the terrible truth. He was not facing just a ship or even a crew. He was facing the embodiment of human fury, the final promise of a species that refused to let innocents die alone. The battle continued, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The final hegemony destroyer spun helplessly through space, its hull cracked open like a broken shell. Flames erupted from its engine compartments before dying instantly in the vacuum, leaving only twisted metal and the scattered debris of what had once been a proud warship. Admiral Thane's flagship drifted nearby, its bridge dark and lifeless. The reptilian commander's dreams of conquest ended forever. Captain Jinho Kim watched the destruction through the cracked viewport of his bridge, his weathered hands trembling as he gripped the arms of his command chair. The Defiant had won, but the victory had come at a price that was only now becoming clear. In the constant hum of the life support systems had developed an irregular rhythm that spoke of failing. "Machinery. Damage report," Kim called out, his voice hoarse from breathing the smoke-filled air of the bridge. Engineer Haejin Park's response came through the communication system, her words broken by fits of coughing. "Sir, we're in bad shape. The reactor core is cracked, and we're leaking radiation into every section of the ship. Hull breaches on decks 4 through 7. Main power is down to emergency levels only." Kim looked around at his crew, seeing the truth written on their faces. Navigator Subin Choi had radiation burns along her neck and arms. Weapons Officer Dong Woo Lee sat slumped at his station, his breathing labored as his body fought the effects of the toxic atmosphere that now filled their ship. "How long do we have?" Kim asked quietly. Park's voice came back after a long pause. "Maybe an hour, sir? The radiation levels are climbing fast, and our medical supplies can't help with this kind of exposure. We pushed the ship too hard, and now it's killing us." Kim nodded, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over him. He had known from the moment they received the distress signal that this would be a one-way mission. The Defiant had been running on borrowed time for years, held together by determination and the skill of its crew. Now finally, their luck had run out. "All hands, this is the captain," he announced over the ship's communication system. "We've completed our mission. Civilians are safe, and the hegemony fleet is destroyed.
Ow.
But our ship is badly damaged, and we won't be making it home." Throughout the vessel, the remaining crew members stopped their work and listened to their captain's final words. In the engine room, Park wiped tears from her eyes as she continued to monitor the failing reactor, the medical bay, the ships. Doctor worked frantically to treat the wounded, knowing that his efforts could only delay the inevitable. "We knew this day would come," Kim continued. "We've been fighting for years, carrying the memory of our lost world and the promise we made to never abandon those in need. Today, we kept that promise one last time." On the mining station, Commander Veltar and his crew watched through the observation windows as the human ship approached. The Defiant moved slowly, its engines sputtering and failing. Sections of its hull glowed with heat, and streams of vapor leaked from countless breaches. It was clear that the ship was dying, along with its heroic crew. "Open a channel, Veltar," ordered, his voice thick with emotion. Kim's image appeared on the station's main screen, his face pale but determined. Behind him, the bridge of the Defiant was filled with smoke and the harsh light of emergency systems. Captain Kim Veltar began, searching for words that could express his gratitude. "We owe you our lives. Is there anything we can do to help?" Kim smiled weakly. "Actually, there is something. Everything we learned about fighting the hegemony, all our tactical knowledge, our history, it needs to survive." "Of course," Veltar replied. "Immediately, we'll preserve everything." The data transfer began, streams of information flowing from the dying human ship to the station's computers. Years of accumulated knowledge, battle tactics developed through desperate experience, and the complete history of humanity's final Exodus fleet. Most importantly, the transfer included the locations of hidden supply caches and the names of allies who might still be willing to fight against the hegemony. Engineer Kethra worked frantically at her station, her crystalline form, flickering with nervous energy as she processed the incoming data. "There's so much here," she whispered in amazement. Tactical manuals, weapon specifications, even personal logs from the crew. As the transfer continued, Kim made his way through the ship, checking on his crew one final time.
In the engine room,
He found Park still at her post, her hands steady on the controls despite the radiation burns covering her arms. "You did good, Park," he said, placing a hand on her shoulder. She looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "We kept the promise, didn't we, Captain? No one fights alone." Kim nodded. "That's right, we kept the promise." In the medical bay, he found the ship's doctor, Jamin Song, treating the wounded with the last of their medical supplies. The man looked up as Kim entered, his face drawn with exhaustion. "How are they holding up?" Kim asked. "As well as can." "Be expected," Song replied. "Radiation exposure is severe, but they're not in pain. That's something at least." Kim continued his rounds, speaking to each crew member, thanking them for their service and sacrifice. These were the last humans in known space, and they had chosen to spend their final hours saving strangers rather than seeking safety for themselves. Back on the bridge, Navigator Choi was still at her station, her hands moving over the controls, with practiced precision even as her body betrayed her. "Captain," she said as he returned, "I've plotted a course that will take us away from the station. When our reactor goes critical, we don't want to damage them." Through the viewport, he could see the mining station, its lights bright against the darkness of space. Of beings from dozens of worlds were alive because of what they had done here today. The data transfer completed just as the Defiant's power systems began their final failure. The ship's lights dimmed and the constant hum of machinery slowly faded to silence. Kim looked around at his crew, these brave souls who had followed him to the end of the galaxy and beyond. "It's been an honor serving with you all," he said quietly, as the human ship drifted into the darkness. Its reactor core finally giving up the fight, the aliens on the station watched in respectful silence. They had witnessed something extraordinary, the final act of a species that had refused to let others suffer alone. In the days that followed, the story of the Defiant sacrifice spread throughout the galaxy. The tactical knowledge preserved in the ship's databases would help others fight against tyranny. But more importantly, the example of Captain Kim and his crew would inspire countless beings to stand up for what was right, knowing that even in the darkest void, heroes could emerge from the stars. The last humans had given everything. It was enough. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.